大成功を。
Okay, before we get started today, I have sort of a question to follow up on the email that I sent that you may not have read. And that basically said that some of you probably were not successful acquiring an image from the rotating drum street camera. And if that's the case, then I made some backups, and I will exchange those if you show me the film that you have. So I don't have enough for everybody, but I know that not everybody needs them. Hopefully there's enough for those that do. So I'll exchange your film with nothing on it for my film with something on it.
That's a good deal right there.
Yeah. Yeah, you get more silver than I get. Yeah, you get silver. The what else? I just want to one more time, once again mention that the final exam, optional, is on Saturday before exam week, and that's because I leave here on Sunday. And you all bought into that at the very beginning. I doubt that any one of you listens to NPR. Anybody listens to? No, somebody does. You ever listen to a program called What Do You Know? That's no way. Anyway, I found out that I'm not the only person in the university circles that approaches the final exam sort of the way that I do, which made me kind of feel good. Because they read out this guy at Michigan State, or University of Michigan, essentially did the same thing. He said, well, the final exam can't count against you. But if you don't take it, then you end up with whatever grades you got up to that point. So I think that's clear. I feel kind of vindicated that I'm not weird, or at least not totally weird. And I think that anyway, it just pointed out that I'm not doing everything totally screwed up. So today I'm going to do something which I normally don't do, and is discuss or present or talk about a very specific camera system. I recognize the fact that this topic that we're going to cover today, the camera itself, is, you might call it obsolete, historical. I guess you could call it historical. But the reason that I included in this sequence of topics is that it is one of the engineering marvels in the history of high-speed photography. And like the other people that I mentioned in the past as being kind of the gurus, the movers and shakers in various disciplines, like John Ott in time-lapse and Harold Edgerton in high-speed flash. And I'm not sure who else I mentioned, but at least those two in those very diverse or dissimilar applications. This camera has a similar kind of an attribute having to do with the person who designed it. And just in case I forget to mention his name later, his name is, well, his first name just escaped me. I think it's Peter, and the last name is Tuttle. Peter Tuttle. No, it's not Tuttle. Tuttle was the guy who was responsible for designing the Kodak high-speed camera with the rotating prism in it. This one, his last name anyway, is Miller. And the camera is designed around something that in the high-speed community is known as the Miller principle. Obviously this Miller principle, whatever it's going to be, is out the window with digital cameras, but nevertheless, this particular topic today is more concerned with history and engineering than it is with a practical or a recent use of such technology. I think that one more time, because this hasn't happened all the time, is you're getting a reprint of some articles that have to do with the topic for today. One of them comes from the manufacturer itself, and the other two articles from technical photography magazines from sometime in the past. One of them is by William Heiser, and if you're ever dropping names or you want to drop names of people that are important, William Heiser ranks sort of towards the top of people that taught the high-speed industry how to get data out of instrumentation. He ran seminars. He was a consultant. He is a consultant to the government agencies. And just like Edgerton was an inspiration to me and many others, Heiser is also a good friend, and he single-handedly kind of taught the high-speed people what use they could make, other than just looking at pretty pictures. So we talked a little bit about trade-offs. It was somewhat mentioned in the last meeting. What are the three things that typically are juggled in order to make high-speed photography possible? It was something having to do with resolution, something having to do with sensitivity, right? And speed. So you'd like a high-speed system? Well, typically you give up either resolution, you may also give up speed. But correct me if I'm wrong about the three attributes that we're juggling. Did I get them right? Would I have passed the midterm? I forget. That was a couple of weeks ago. Huh?
Not with that one question.
Not with that one question? Okay, what were the three?
Resolution, speed, and...
Me too. Now, we'll look it up. But anyway, there are a number of factors that are juggled. And as your desire increases for higher and higher framing rates, typically the thing that gets cut first is resolution. And the way that in the film world you cut it, actually in the film and digital world, the way that you cut resolution is you make the image sizes smaller. If your pictures are 1,000 by 1,000 somethings, in that case you can send that at a particular rate somewhere. But if they're only 10 by 10, in that case you can send maybe 10,000 of those. It's an area thing, right? So, but regardless of whether I have the numbers just right, the important thing is that you cut down an image size. In the mechanical world, the thing that often stops you from going faster is a need to well, at the very beginning, the need to stop and go. So the intermittent camera systems have a particular top speed, and that peters out around 500 pictures a second. And then we talked later about the, okay, you don't want to stop it, so what you do is you keep it moving, and then you give up some resolution because now you're trying to move the image as fast as the film moves, and you may not be able to do it quite 100%. However, there is a desire to keep the 16 millimeter frame size as a desirable objective. We don't want to make any smaller than that because now resolution really suffers. So if you want to keep the framing, or the frame large, now you have to come up with other things to do. And as an aside, so I get my head straight over here, I was at a conference this weekend, and there was a speaker who was presenting some awful slides. And then he would say, see this little detail over here? We're going to get to it later. And then a little later, it's like, oh, see this little gadget on this side? Well, we'll talk about it later. The thing that ticked me off was he never did that. He said that he would do it, and he never did it. Well, what kind of a speaker is that? Yeah, right there. So I'm trying not to do the same thing. But we're going to get to the camera, I hope, shortly. And the point is that you want to keep that frame size large, and the other is that you want a high speed, higher than the rotating prism cameras can do. And they can do 10,000 frames a second. If you cut the frame in half, which we don't want to do, you can go faster. But if that frame size is important, in that case, you need to come up with another approach to getting a higher framing rate than what we talked about so far. You probably have to keep the film in motion. And you probably have to match the image speed with the film speed. But there are other ways of doing it than simply with a rotating prism. And I think I mentioned this particular fact about high-speed photography already. It bears repeating. And that is that while you might talk about cameras that run at 1 million pictures per second, you never run those cameras for a second. Why?
So 1 million pictures.
You get 1 million pictures. That's a pain to look through 1 million pictures, right? So you don't do that. That's kind of a given in high-speed photography. You try to tailor the storage or the images that you're going to record so that it's in the same ballpark as the event that you happen to photograph. The highest speed cameras operate at billions of pictures per second. It's impressive, billions of pictures per second. They only take 8 pictures. So is that something to get excited about? Yeah. If you have a subject that lasts a couple of billionths of a second. But in general photography and general applications, that's not the case. Now the rotating prism cameras are able to expose 4,000 frames on 100 feet of film. Now they suffer from various drawbacks, one of them being that the cameras don't accelerate to the rate that you want them to run at instantly. Now in the digital world, that's not the case. You flick a switch and the camera runs at whatever speed that you have set it to. But in the film world, that's not the case. You can't speed up things from 0 to some speed, just like cars. You know? They don't go from 0 to 60 in no time. If you restrict the number of photographs that you take to smaller than 4,000, and you are concerned about a high framing rate, and you are probably also concerned about keeping the speed constant. So when you say the camera's running at 5,000 pictures a second, that's what it does, from one end of the film to the other, or from one end of the whatever to whatever. So a constant rate, a limited number of frames, and a high framing rate. Those might be objectives, and those are partially determined by the framing size that you choose. Well, the camera that I happened to get from government surplus, called the Dynafax, addresses these problems. It, in general, the specs say something to the fact that it's able to make 224 pictures. That's better than 8, right? And it's able to do that at a rate of 25,000 pictures per second. And not only that, the framing rate throughout its run is constant. So while in the case of film cameras and you need an external timing light generator to put marks on the film that are so many milliseconds or microseconds apart. And you might say, well, in the digital realm, we don't need that. Well, in the digital realm, the timing information is built into the frames. You don't need an external. The timing is very important. So the approach that was taken by one particular group, and this was the Beckman and Whitley company many years ago. That was then taken over by another company that's still running today, Corden. So if you again dropping names, Corden is at the top of the food chain, so to speak, in terms of providing high-speed and ultra-high-speed photography equipment, very specialized stuff, to government labs and so on. They're out in Salt Lake City. And so one way to achieve a high framing rate is to, I'm taking an offshoot course over here, is to not move the film anymore, but rather move the image. But what about if you don't want to go quite so fast, you want more pictures, and you want them to be big? Well, the Dynafax camera, which is the reprint that you have, is the design approach that was taken by Beckman and Whitley to begin with, and Miller, I think it was Peter Miller. And what he did is he said, well, you know what? I can put film on a drum, just like we did last week. Except that instead of putting it on the outside of the drum, I'll put it on the inside of the drum. And in fact, I have another drum camera here that does exactly the same thing, just like we did, except that the film is on the inside. Now, why would you want to put it on the inside? The reason is that if you put it on the outside, it has a tendency to fly off, right? Put it on the inside, it's not so much of a problem. Now, for this camera, in order to get the image to the film, you need some kind of mirror. So you have a lens out here, goes to here, and goes to there. You need to deflect the image onto the film, which is on the inside of this drum. A drum camera has a lot to be said for it, because when it's running, the RPM, it's turning around, is constant. So all you need to know is how fast that film is being carried by this drum to determine something. Timing lights or any other type of auxiliary timing is not really necessary, as long as you know how fast this is rotating. The other thing, drum cameras like this one, and the one that we used last week, have a characteristics that makes them very appealing. And I'll get to that after I tell you that 16mm cameras and many other cameras don't have the characteristics of always being ready to make a photograph. So, unlike you, these cameras are always alert. And that's very important, because all they need is light to fall on the film, and they are recording. Other cameras need kind of synchronization devices and make it like this. They don't. As long as the event is self-luminous, what are they used for? An atomic bomb going on. Anyway, as long as they're self-luminous, they record instantly when the light gets there. So they are always alert, they are consistent in the speed at which they run, and they use a limited amount of film to record the pictures. In digital, you could say, well, they have a certain amount of memory. And they don't need an awful lot of memory, they just need enough for whatever you hold in here. You don't need 100 feet of film. You can do it on on the circumference of this film, which might be just 3 feet. So they're inexpensive from a film point of view. They require little storage space if it's in the, well, in the digital realm there are no cameras like this. They mimic it, but they're not like this. And they run at consistent speed, and they can photograph at a high rate. So how do they do that? Well, first of all, the camera puts images on the edge of the film, on half of the edge running around it, and there's enough room there for 112 pictures. Now, to get 112 pictures over there, somehow you need to get an optical system to travel into the edge of this film. How do they do that? It starts out with an objective to the side, and I think if you want to kind of follow along here, on the back side of this thing, there's a schematic of the camera. And if you don't have one of these, come on and pick them up. I might draw it the other way. Some kind of a lens here, and the light goes in. Just like in the previous camera that I kind of quickly drew, the objective lens puts an image in space. It's a real image. It's upside down, just like it would be on your camera. And the frame here is equivalent to a 16mm frame. And I think those are I forget what the size of a 16mm frame is. If you're online out there, then just look it up. Google it. Anyway, this image right here is an image of whatever the subject is. That needs to be taken to the inside of the camera. And after this, what you have in the camera, there is something called a field lens. All that does is collects all the light that's in here and sends it on. If the field lens weren't there, in that case, whatever optical system there were behind here would only look at a very small dot or portion of that whole image. The field lens lets you see all the way out to the edges. So now that the image is there, we need to, or it will be, image further down the chain. And that is, however, is, you can see it better over there. And this lens is not here, but so we have a mirror, and there's a lens here, and the distance from this lens to this mirror to that field lens is 2 focal lengths of this lens. And you know what happens when you image something which is 2 focal lengths away? How far is the image? And how big is it? When the subject is 2 focal lengths away from my lens, it's a special condition.
1-to-1.
It's 1-to-1. And how far away is it?
2 photons.
That's right. It's something that should come to you, like falling off a log. We're talking lenses. Someplace in the back of your mind should be that fact. You may not need it, but it's there. Just like when somebody says, how dense is a 0.3 neutral density filter?
Stop.
Yeah, it should be back there immediately. So somebody says 0.3, your brain should already have that lock mechanism to say, well, I might need this. 50%, one stop, etc. The same thing here. 2 focal lengths away, 1-to-1. And when you're imaging 1-to-1 this way, you must lose some light. How much? Yeah, very good. It's easy. Anyway, this now goes further into the camera, and I'm going to change it the way that I'm drawing it. Just redirecting it into a virtual 3D something is kind of a pain. So we started with a camera lens. We'll have light going in this way. We have a field stop over here, right, and a field lens. And then further on we have, I guess it's going to go this way. I'm going to take it up, and we put an image here, and I guess this has to be about the same distance as that. And this goes, I believe, to another mirror. Now this mirror is an 8-sided mirror. And it can be oriented so that it's directly in line with the light, or it can send the light to the left or to the right, either this way or that way, right? Now, one focal length away from here, there's an obstruction. And essentially it's a hole. It could have many different shapes, but typically what it is a hole that looks like this. It has a diamond shape to it. And light from the image here has to go through that hole to get to here. Now so if this, the image of this, or no, the real thing is one focal length away from this lens, how far away does that lens will bring that to focus? If you have anything one focal length away from a lens, where does the lens focus that image? That's right. So light rays from this travel in parallel lines, because this lens is saying, oh, this is one focal length away. I'll focus it at infinity. Parallel light, right? So it too, all this light gets bent this way or that way. So there are two optical systems not superimposed. One is this image, and the other one is the image of this one. We could take the image that goes this way. Well, it's easier for me to work on that one. And intercept it with another lens. Probably a lens might be very similar in focal length to this one. Well, we'll take a look at that. So this lens is going to say, well, this thing, the light from here, goes to infinity. I get it. Now what do I bring it to focus? How far away from here? It's coming from infinity. How far it's going to be focused at? One focal length away. So right here, there's an image of that stop. This opening here is filled with light because the light comes from the original image formed by the camera lens. And this is life size. Okay? Life size to that. Now in here, the camera has a physical replica of that stop. Now this has a hole in it, a physical hole. So when the image and this physical stop are lined up with each other, then light can pass on through to the system. But when they are offset, then no light can go through. Light's, still bent by that mirror, but it can't pass. The function of this system is to limit the length of time during which exposure takes place. It's essentially the shutter of the camera. The movement of that image, or the light that's in this image, over that is governed by how fast this thing is rotated. The amount of light that goes through is limited in the system by how big that opening is to begin with, and how big this one is. The reason for the shape of the shutter, the mechanism, is that it has something to do with the efficiency of the light transmission through it. think back about the flash system. Talk about a flash that has a response sort of like this. Well, we don't want that. Right? We want a response which is like this, or as close to that as possible. We want the shortest exposure time. So, you know, with flash photography, you measure 50% to 50%. Well, we could take that approach to measure how light goes through one of these corresponding, the opening with its corresponding input from the light, the image. As you look at this, here, a diamond again. And we have, and now we'll have a physical stop. So that's, come on, draw it better. So this is the light. That's the opening through which the light is going to go. At the very beginning, it looks like this. Very little light can go through. Some, but not a lot. Now, as this moves over, the light level that gets through the system increases. Eventually, the two of them are going to match, and at that point, you reach a maximum amount of light going through the system. And after that, the size of the hole diminishes, and then diminishes. Now, if you draw a curve for this, as to what the transmission capability of the system is, it looks sort of like this. And where do you measure exposure time? Half peak to half peak, which is from here to here. If the hole were a different shape than this, supposing that you said, well, I want to put a square hole and a square light source. And you slide this image over that hole. This will look more like, it still reaches a peak, but it has an edge like this. So what's the exposure time in that case? Oh, it's that long. You want good action stopping ability in high-speed photography, so your pictures are sharp. I noticed an ad just recently, you might have two, maybe, of a car driving down the street. Maybe it was a Kia or something. And the wheel has spokes on it. Very distinct spokes, even as the car is moving. Normally, you wouldn't see those spokes, would you? They'd be blurry. But in this one, they were sharp. Why were they sharp? Because the video camera that shot it was set to a short exposure time. Still running 30 pictures a second. But maybe 1,000th of a second per picture. And that gives you sharp spokes, which, you know, visually may not be that attractive. But in this case, they're okay. But that happens because you're getting a shutter that has a short exposure time during the framing time. So anyway, the cameras are equipped with these diamond stops, diamond shuttering system, assigned to Miller, because you want the shortest exposure time you can get for any given configuration of the lights, the image of the first stop versus the stop itself. Exposure time now is a function of how long it takes this to go over that. And this can be, and this is sort of a constant for whatever framing rate is or whatever the rotation is of that drum, that becomes a constant. It becomes what's called the shutter factor. And these have a shutter factor of 20. That means that the exposure time that they deliver to the film is a 20th of the framing rate of the reciprocal of the framing rate of the camera. So if you're running at 20,000 pictures per second, that's your framing rate. The reciprocal of that is that, and a factor of 20 says 20x. So at 20,000 pictures per second, the exposure time delivered by this system is 1/400,000th of a second, right?
Yep.
If you want shorter exposure times, you get yourself a shutter factor or an opening which is smaller than that. If you want a lot more light, in that case, we'll get one that's bigger. Now, well, the factor 20 shutter on this camera is the smallest that it'll go from the factory. But you can get shutter factors of, I think it goes 20. Well, I better not quote that. Probably 10 or something, which just gives you a bit longer exposure time. Okay. Okay, I say that guardedly. Because we're at this point right now, and now we're going to go further with the light that came through this opening. So we put right here. Oh, I gotta put it like this. This lens puts an image of this image. So there is an image there. It is, and it's the same as this. It's a life-size copy. It's arranged in such a manner that it's a little removed from the surface of that mirror. The reason for that is that if it were in the surface of the mirror, it would be standing still, essentially. It's like you were looking at that and they were not moving. But what we're going to do is take that image, and with this lens right here, located, this is one focal length away from here. So what comes out for that is light rays that focus to infinity, but we pick up that with another lens. And it says, oh, okay, it's coming from infinity. I'm going to put it over here, one focal length away. I believe that's the, what is it? On the top it's number 11. It's a second relay lens, right? 11? Yeah, imaging relay lens or second image lens. So this says, well, I got light rays coming from that image that are focused by this lens to infinity, so where do I focus on? Well, one focal length away. Now since this, because the mirror is moving, is a moving image, this image will be moving also. So I got a moving image. How do I make that look still to film, which is going to be moving there? Make the film move just as fast. Well, how do I do that? Well, the film is in this drum. So the drum is spinning the film. So you adjust the speed of the drum so that the image, this doesn't have to be an image of anything that's moving. It could be just a resolution target, right? Because this is a stationary image. This is a moving image of a stationary image. So the objective now, what you need to do, is to make these two move at the same speed. Now, this is a function of how fast this is looking. The faster it rotates, the faster this image is going to move. So now we can take a look at the drum itself. Okay. I said that it has room for 112 pictures, 16 millimeter frame. In here, there is this 8-sided mirror. And it's going to rotate it. Each facet of this mirror is going to make one image. One image on one side. I will just worry about that. So for each turn, it makes one image. That's 8 images per turn. But there are 112 of them. So supposing that, so how many times do you have to rotate this in order to make 112 pictures? So 112 divided by 8, right? And that's what? How about 14? Right? 8 times 10 is 80. 4 times 8 is 32. Add the 2, 112. Right? So you rotate this 14 times the rate at which you rotate this. That means that during one revolution of this drum, you'll put down 112 images, and this will turn 14 times, with each facet making one picture. But this camera is capable of roughly 25,000 pictures per second. How does it do that? The film in the camera is 35 millimeters wide. Sprocket holes. The images are 16 millimeter size. They're not very big. So you can fit an image here. And that's what we just did. We put 112 images on one side of the film. Oh, we still get the other side left. The image is not that big. So this beam that goes to the right, before that it also goes to the left. Okay? So actually each facet is making two images, one here and one here. But they're offset in time. Because this has to turn. Or the mirror has to turn to bring the images from, or the light from here to here. It turns 22.5 degrees. 2.5 degrees. Because anything which is reflected from a mirror deflects twice as far as the mirror is deflected, right? So if you turn a mirror 45 degrees, you know, if I had a mirror here and you were looking at it, and I turned it 45 degrees, I would be able to look at you from 90 degrees away. I only turned the mirror 45 degrees. That's pretty neat. So we pick up the two conditions. They're 45 degrees apart, where the light can be picked, well, it can be picked up anywhere, but you make it symmetrical. One here, one there. And then the next facet comes around, you do this one and that one. The next facet, this one, that one. On the film itself, this will result in 112 pictures here, and then 112 pictures on the other side. How do you get to the other side? Well, you introduce a mirror, and a mirror system, and that you see as number 12. Okay, those are deflecting mirrors. So one of them sends, one of those mirror sets, sends the light to the right of the film, the other one to the left of the film. There are 112 here, 112 here. Now, if you, that's a total of 224, right? Now, suppose you turn this drum. And by the way, because this turns 14 times faster than the big one, this is a fixed relationship. If you turn the drum slowly, this turns slowly. If you turn the drum quickly, this turns quickly. No matter how fast you turn it, it always puts down 112 on one side and 112 on the other side. And after it has done that, it re-exposes the photosensitive material. Right? So that's one of the maybe disadvantages of drum cameras, and that is that they re-expose the film after they've made one turn. So to prevent that, the cameras have a way of doing that. You select a secondary shutter, which is way up here someplace, and you set it for an exposure time which is less than the time it takes the drum to make one turn. But once you do that, the camera becomes no longer always alert. You need to make that shutter open and close at a particular time. And you lose the big advantage of drum cameras, which is being always alert. So, if you turn the big drum in 100th of a second, you're making 224, right? In 1/100th of a second. So your framing rate effectively becomes what? 22,400 pictures per second. It's pretty close to 25, right? How much film do you use for this? Well, about 3 feet, whatever the circumference of the drum is, plus a little more. How do you regulate the speed at which the camera runs? Well, just give the motor more juice. Faster it goes, the faster the frame rate. The modern version of this, which is sold by Corden, and they still sell them, is maybe the mechanics are a little bit more refined. So they say, well, the Corden Dynafax camera can run at 35,000 pictures per second. Yeah, all they've done is they made this turn a little faster. What is this camera limit in terms of framing rate? Well, it's always a mechanical problem. This little 8-sided prism has to turn 14 times in the time it takes this to turn once. So, supposing that this takes 1/100th of a second, in 1/100th of a second this has to make 14 turns. So it's turning at what? 14 times in 1/100th, right? That's 1,400 times per second. Yeah, that's pretty fast. If you want to figure out that in RPM, multiply that times 60. That's 60,000 something, 80,000 RPM. So you start to go a little faster, pretty soon this little mirror shatters. In a way, this is sort of a magician's camera. It's all done with mirrors. Miller depends on reflecting it over here a couple times, but the important thing is that little rotating prism in the middle, and coupling that to a drum. And they can't go out of speed. All you need to know is, what's the RPM of the drum. And so the camera has a little tachometer built into it to tell you that, and that's all you need. So this is described to you in the manufacturer supplied literature right here by Dynafax, by Beckman and Whitley. And then Heiser gives you some examples of what the camera is useful for. And what we'll do for the next few minutes after you take a little break is to I'll actually demonstrate the camera. Let you take a look at it. It won't take an awful long time. And then on tomorrow evening, what we're going to do is apply it for something that it is very well suited for, and that is high framing rate, short exposure times, and a limited amount of film. And what you'll need to provide again is film. I think a 24 exposure will do it. Anyway, it's about 3.5 feet of film. So you figure that one out. And 400 speed film would probably be okay. But I'll go into that again after we take a little break, all right? Oh, but before we take the break, and while it's fresh in your mind, do you have any questions? I'm particularly attached to this camera because it's about a $25,000 mechanical camera, and I bought it for $50. It's the government was getting rid of it as out of spec or something, but it has everything still in it. It may not be quite perfect, but it's one of those things you pay homage to the engineers who designed it. You pay homage to the piece of equipment, if you believe in idols. So take a break. We'll get together again in about 10 minutes. And maybe you think about a question when you get done.